Brian and Charles sounds like it's the least robotic title for a movie of all time.
Well, it's also the least robotic movie. So it's a touchingly absurdist comedy drama from David Earl and Chris Hayward, who wrote it and also star in it. And it's about an eccentric inventor and this ramshackle robot. So David Earl is Brian. He lives in a remote cottage in the Welsh Valleys, where he spends his time knocking out madcap inventions. Here is a clip from very early on in Brian and Charles.
See how dirty his glasses were? Absolutely filthy.
It was largely a visual clip again. We are doing that quite a lot. So anyway, that's him in his infamous inventions pantry. And he also makes things, he makes a flying cuckoo clock so that anybody in the village wants to know the time, they can just look up and go, oh, look, there's Brian with his clock. And then he invents trawler nets for shoes. Anyway, one day he sees some fly tipping and he discovers a fly-tipped mannequin head. And the next thing is he gets a washing machine, drags the washing machine and the mannequin head into his workshop and comes out with a robot that is named Charles and then adopts the surname Charles Petrescu. And he says, hello, I'm Charles Petrescu. And I am your
Charles
friend.
Petrescu?
It's a name that he's seen, and therefore the robot likes it. And Brian immediately thinks, okay, well, we should probably keep Charles a secret because the locals may not react entirely well. So they spend their days playing darts, dancing, cooking cabbages, riding bikes, having pillow fights. There's this kind of montage of them having a great time together to the Turtles' Happy Together.
Great song.
And then Charles watches a television series about travel and he wants to go to Honolulu. And then, so it's all very idyllic. And then adolescence dawns and Charles starts to behave like a sort of slightly stroppy teenager and becomes more and more difficult. And Brian then has to become more and more parental. Now, the point is, Charles is a mannequin's head with a big boxy washing machine body wearing a shirt and two arms coming out of it. It just looks absolutely chaotically all over the place. So the first thing that the film manages to do is it actually manages to make you believe in Charles as a sentient being with this kind of slightly Max Headroom-y, glitchy voice. Hello, I'm Charles Petrescu. But you do buy into it as being him, as being a him, the fact that it's a him. Second thing is this began life as a radio internet show and then a stand-up act, which then gave birth to a short film, which was 2017. Short film was very well received. This is then turned into a feature. In the short film, there's not a huge amount of jeopardy. It's just the two of them together, and then at one point they fall out and Brian takes Charles off to live under a tree and then he is reunited with him, and that's the end of it. In the case of this, because it's a feature, they have to up the ante. So there is a local bully and bonfire builder called Eddie, whose family terrorised the neighbourhood. And then there's Hazel, played by Louise Brealey, who's a woman who lives in the village. She lives with her domineering mother and a parrot. And she's clearly she's clear kindred spirit to Brian. But it's Charles who says, you should ask her to go for a walk by the lake. And here's the thing. It sounds like it shouldn't work at all. But it really does, and it works for a number of reasons. The first one is that there is something very, very charming about the DIY comedy, about this ridiculous-looking robot that you come to believe in as a sentient thing. The way that he moves, I mean, people don't concentrate enough on how much physical comedy is really complicated and a very sort of it looks a bit like, in Wallace and Gromit, the wrong trousers, the whole thing about the trousers are completely oversized. Well, there is something of that about the way in which Charles's body is configured. Also, there's something very uncynical about the film because it's about loneliness and it's about being on your own, and it's kind of about having an imaginary friend who then becomes a real friend. And if you compare this to, there's lots of films about AI companionship. I mean, particularly recently, because, of course, AI companionship has now become a real thing in the real world. People, particularly for the elderly, and, this is kind of being outsourced to artificial intelligence. But there is something really charming about that idea of somebody who's very lonely, got a very, very creative mind, with a bit of a madcap mind, but it's kind of desperate for companionship. And that companionship then manifests itself in, I mean, he's like Caractacus Potts, you know, in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. He's always sort of making these kind of weird inventions. They don't quite work, but they kind of work, like the hair cutting machine that he goes off to the fairground that everyone forgets about, me old bamboo being in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. So there's that, but there's also the charm of the slapstick comedy. The slapstick comedy being the spectre of Charles walking around talking with this, I said, this slightly Max Headroom voice. And then the whole thing has got this kind of cinematic grandeur that it's in this remote cottage, which is out among the valleys and the hills, which kind of gives it there's some kind of essentialist charm to it.
What's essentialist?
I'm probably using the word wrongly. It feels like there's something quite primal about it. I mean, on one level, it's like an archetypal story about somebody being lonely in a world in which they are completely alone, and therefore it's the Frankenstein myth, isn't it? It's that, you know, in the same way that Victor Frankenstein gets a whole bunch of mismatched body parts, puts them together, breathes life into them, and then he's terrified by what he's done and immediately sends his creation off into the world.
That's Frankenstein.
That's Frankenstein, Froderick. Yes, that's right.
Frau Blucher.
You take the blonde, I'll take the one in the toilet. So it is a version of that story, which is a very familiar story, but it's done. I thought it was done really well. I thought it was really touching and really funny. The relationship between Brian and Hazel is beautifully observed. But the figure of Charles has that kind of childlike loneliness that I associate with Silent Running, and then developing into adolescence. And also, I mean, you can read more into it. You could see it as an analogy for, I mean, I think anyone who's had an older relative who has been affected by Alzheimer's will also see echoes. I mean, obviously, this is a personal thing. You take from movies what you bring to them, and I bring that to movies quite a lot now. But I just thought it was very funny and very touching and very charming and very DIY and very, very homegrown in a way that kind of, I mean, weirdly, it had me thinking of Withnail and I, although it's tonally very different, but it did have me thinking of Withnail and I in that same kind of way. If you thought this film couldn't have been made anywhere else. Anyway, I thought it was really lovely. It's called Brian and Charles, and it's in cinemas.